Hi and welcome to our next interview about this book this time, CMake book, Modern CMake for C++. And of course, we have the author here, Rafał Świdziński, who has written this book about modern CMake, and I've taken already a very extensive look into it, and actually it covers a lot of the newer things on CMake, which is pretty nice. But let's get started with a quick introduction. Rafał, what are you up to?
Well, what I'm up to, after completing this book, while I was working at Google, I've decided to look into other venues, and I'm exploring currently work here in a company called Axon, which makes body cams for police officers and other things like that. And we are doing AI assistant on those body cams. Sadly, there is no C++ in there, but I'm hoping to sneak some in, as soon as an opportunity arises. So, currently, unfortunately, not engaged as much with C++. However, we do use some CMake to build some of the Go stuff that we have there. So that's exciting. Unfortunately, most of the stuff is already set. Not that much to do just yet. But who knows?
Great, yeah. Go actually is also interesting, and it's interesting that you can, use CMake with that. There's actually something I learned today from the book, that there's quite an extensive list of languages you can use CMake with. Let me go into the book. This is a book, and I think we're going to quickly have a view at the various chapters. So this is the cover, and then we're going to go in the table of contents. So the book just starts with an introduction of what CMake is and the various ways to run it on your OS, etc., which I find really nice. Then you get a bit of an introduction into the CMake language, and then actually we now get an introduction into the CMake popular IDEs, and then we start with setting up our first CMake project. Rafał, what do you try to cover with the book as a total? As you know that you're setting up your first CMake project here, and working with targets, etc. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, sure. So this is actually the second edition of the book, right? If you're aware, there was this previous first edition of the book that I published, I think about 2 years before this one came out. And in the original book, what I intended to do is just essentially introduce people to CMake as a tool and help to bring all of the knowledge that's available out there into something that's cohesive and essentially takes you from the beginning to the end in a way that doesn't essentially generate too many questions. Like when you have a project that you want to build, that you want to make professional and presentable, so that it's up to the standard available out there, it's very difficult to find a cohesive guide, how you start, how you get to the middle and to the end, and what else you have to think about as you build your C++ or other code specifically. And after writing the first book and arriving at the very end of that book, as I was submitting my chapters to the publisher, at the very end, I realized that actually I learned so much in the process that I probably should start from the beginning and start re-editing the first, second, and third chapters all over again. So whenever the opportunity was presented to me to come up with a second edition, more or less that's what I did. Essentially, I wrote a good attempt to explain CMake, and then I was given an opportunity to actually try and do it as best as I possibly can. So with this book, what I'm trying to do is teach you and everybody who actually has some experience with CMake before, how you can start with something that you already understand, which is C++ code, and make it so that others can also use it. And if you haven't had experience with CMake before, it's good to start from the perspective of somebody who has used CMake from, let's say, other people's projects, and essentially understand, okay, here's the project, how do I use CMake within the project so I can use the project?
That makes sense. Actually, yeah, I've been looking today at the printed book, and in previous I've read through some of the ebook you see here. Actually, here gets interesting with compiling C++ sources with CMake at 169. So your book is quite extensive here about CMake, but then also handles, of course, the needs of C++ projects. And I do know actually, then you cover linking executables with libraries, and the project you design also has libraries in it, which I like. That's actually something which I want to take a look at. Then you go into managing dependencies with CMake, and actually let's talk a bit about using C++ 20 modules. How's your experience there with CMake?
It was a mixed bag, honestly, and you can see that through the chapter as I wrote it. At the time when the book was created, there wasn't that much support in the environment itself. So all the tool chains, all the compilers, they weren't providing everything that's necessary to just have it in the CMake projects. However, at the time, I tried to make the best attempt at explaining how you can still do this regardless, like which specific version of which specific compiler will allow you to use this. And that's, I believe, done for GNU projects, GNU compiler, and also Clan. So I do have those two alternatives discussed there, and what else you need to do to essentially use that. But CMake only actually fully allows that in, I believe, 328 or something like that. And you have to go through like multiple hacks before that to actually use it in earlier versions of CMake. So that kind of depends which version of CMake you're kind of forced to use, and from there you can make it into a very nice way or a very hacky way. Regardless, I still feel like C++ 20 modules are not yet a first-class citizen in CMake and in the environment just yet. So maybe in a year we will have something that doesn't give you any problems whatsoever. But right now, I think this is like as cutting edge as you can possibly get.
Yeah, I do think that also modules is still in a form and in a way being rolled out that, GCC 15 now brings better support for it, but still, who's running on 15 right now? If you use GCC and Clang, and then at some point we have to iron out all those differences between the implementations.
Yep, there's plenty of work there, and this is definitely very early days.
Going to shape the next years.
But yeah, I'm hoping that with this chapter would allow people who want to play with it already and understand, what the challenges are, to have their go and like, okay, at least, pull the curtain away a little bit and allow them to step in.
True. Then you continue with testing frameworks, which I'm always a fan of. Testing is actually mentioned, and that's something where I have to look at again. Like, I know CMake has test integrations, but then generally people might, prefer to run their own. So can you shine a bit of light on testing with CMake?
Yeah, I think this is a very undervalued feature of CMake. A lot of people don't realize how powerful this is. So I wanted to have a specific chapter just on the testing frameworks because, of course, like the book is about creating professional projects, right? And there is not a single professional project without automated tests. You have to have it, otherwise, what are you even doing? I'm joking, but you get the point. So you can, of course, run your custom test framework from the command line and just don't do CMake features whatsoever. But what CMake brings here is it's a standardized ways of doing things, right? So it doesn't matter which frameworks you're going to bring in, as long as you use CTest, the tool that comes with CMake, you're essentially allowing your users and your systems that you put your projects into to use a standardized way across the board. So if you're part of a team in a bigger company and the company has multiple different C++ projects, if all of you are going to use CMake, there's only one way that the environment has to support it. And then from C test, you can essentially use whatever you'd like. However, it's always recommended to go with the testing frameworks that are the most popular and have the richest support and community around them.
That's true. You continue then with program analysis tools and generating documentation, installing and packaging, which I think is all important things. And then on the 15th chapter, you go through creating your professional project. What's this chapter about? Because now we have like 14 chapters behind us, where we already in chapter 4 we're setting up our first CMake project. And what are you doing now in the 15th chapter?
Yeah. So as you go through this table of context and you kind of understand different things, all of them are presented to you, in a smaller scope individually, right? You get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I try to strip away all of the context out of the specific problem that we are focusing on, just to make it simpler and easier to focus on. But as we go through all of these things, eventually they end up in a bigger project, right? All of these things you would love to have something that's like cohesive, well-structured unit. So the chapter that you just mentioned, 15, is essentially doing that. Everything that we learned so far, now we are putting together to build this bigger thing. And how we are going to do that, this is essentially going through all the previous chapters, recognizing which of the techniques are presented there, making some picks. The book presents you with many alternatives, so I just pick something that worked well together and making those choices, and this is how all of these things come together in a project that then you can build, distribute, package, and so on and so forth.
That's true. And then we have the last chapter, which is about CMake presets,
Right.
which I really like. But yeah, go ahead. Anyways, I think it's like something which is a bit under-implemented in some ways, so it's really nice to see that this is part of your book.
Yes, that's right. I found this, very interesting to add at the very end, because when you end up in having, a complete project, there's still a little bit of command line that allows you to customize CMake depending on, what environment you're building for, what platform, all the other stuff that you perhaps want to have. But for some users, there is not that much use case, for giving them too much customization, or you essentially want to simplify those things. And CMake presets are essentially that thing. They allow you to configure all the command line that you're going to use to execute the build of the project, and they allow you to make it even higher level than just the CMake itself. Right, so CMake presets are the way to do that, and just introducing it at the very end is very valuable, because now you can understand, what is the workflow, how different stages come together in order to build this project, and how you can make it even more convenient for your users to use the project straight from your repository.
Yeah, it's something I gotta read that one. Which basically, this is the book, and as I mentioned, I do think it's really helpful if you want to read up for modern CMake to have it. Let's go over to the interview part, and reminder to the chat, just post your question. I have a few questions. But let's bring up one audience question from Hani Sukasan. Hi, Rafał. Will this book cover CMake integration with modern package managers such as Conan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great idea, and I would love to put that in. But as you can tell, the book is already 500 pages almost. So adding more to that is really putting us at a very strained place. So this book specifically does not cover that, packages managers. However, there is something about packaging in this book because CMake supports that out of the box. I'm not aware of great support for Conan specifically in CMake, so I didn't explore that subject in this specific edition. Maybe this is something to add in the next edition. We'll see. I mean, there are books that are like twice as long or even 3 times as long on software engineering, and some of them have been written by our beloved Björn, but there is a point where you just have to say enough.
That's true. Actually, that brings me to, there's a lot of questions. I think the question for what audience this book is fairly clear. It's for people who use CMake, which is like everyone in C++, right? It has become default.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But I specifically mentioned here not only build engineers and people who are professionally dealing with C++, but I would also recommend this to people who feel they understand CMake and they have learned it organically through projects that they dealt with without actually investigating the subject whatsoever. Because what I found is very often when people deal with CMake, they do a lot of cargo cult programming. So like we feel we understand the language, but actually the reason why we have such an extensive intro to CMake at the very beginning of the book is there is a lot of complexity there and some things that are not very well explained in documentation. And the simplest of them is like arguments. And I do spend some time talking about arguments to functions or commands in CMake because the subject is really tricky. And it seems like the language is very clear when you look at it, but you try to change something and it doesn't work, and you spend much more time trying to figure out how to fix it rather than just reading this chapter about those arguments that you would have the problem solved for.
Yeah, I actually been in that situation. I use CMake init and created a project, and now I only have like a debug version of it in the IDE. So I probably need to create a preset for the IDE to understand how to make a release version of it. And we talked about Conan not being in the book, which that's something to add on, right? I agree. Of course, it would be interesting to know about. But what else didn't make it to the book? 16 chapters.
There was a lot. There was a lot. I mean, I regret not adding more on building libraries in the book specifically, because this is such an extensive topic and there is plenty to say about that. We touch on building libraries very briefly, but essentially one chapter talks about 3 different kinds of libraries, and that's it. We just introduce the topic and say what CMake supports and how. However, this book kind of tries to go a little bit beyond just simply how you use CMake to do a thing, but also tries to teach you best practices, like how you would do in a good project, right? How you would structure it, how you would build a library, what's important and what's not. And my hope, if we get to write a 3rd edition at some point, is to essentially build on this topic more and introduce a deeper understanding of libraries, how they work, how you would design a library, how it's in the context of CMake, of course, and C++. So that's definitely one thing. The other thing that I was also investigating to add to CMake is C-, which is part of the tool chain that Kitware, the company that makes CMake, adds to the whole ecosystem. And it's essentially building multiple CMake projects and running them in kind of like CI/CD environment. And maybe there is a room in this book to add that. I tried to fit it in this edition actually, but I decided against it in the interest of time.
Yeah, that's understandable. So when you read this book, what's going to change in your knowledge about C++? I mean, it's of course not covering any fancy things, but I guess it's always interesting to understand how our projects come to life, and it's part of the development cycle.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would talk, at length about is how you can write better, cleaner, nicer code. And part of that is in this book specifically when we talk about not only structuring projects, but also thinking about key aspects of a good project, like testing, making sure that it's legible for others, and essentially using a tool that standardizes the process for everybody, and everybody's following kind of the same known patterns that are well established in the business, helps you to essentially take away the guesswork. If you follow what the book tells you, you will end up with a project that's already structured with a great deal of thought, and helps you to essentially put your C++ code there where it needs to be.
Makes sense. What did you learn about C++ while writing the book?
While writing the book about C++ and CMake, I learned a great deal. The most is I don't understand this language because there is a great deal of complexity to it. However, one of the very interesting things to investigate as part of writing this book is the process of compilation, linking, and essentially dealing with that lower layer of the program closer to the system. So one of the things that were very interesting to research and to put in one of the chapters is essentially how the program gets compiled and loaded into memory, how all the dependencies get brought in, dynamic and static libraries, what is their respective place in the file, in the memory, how individual items get turned from sections to segments and all that. So quite a lot of very cool in-depth knowledge that seems very arcane unless you actually see it from the perspective of compiled code units. So definitely there was a lot to learn there.
Indeed. Just a quick reminder for the chat to, if you have questions about CMake. But I've recently given a talk on experimenting with AI, and you've mentioned that you run your own LLMs. So just generally, how do you see AI for coding? It's just a hype topic right now, so I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a very context-specific problem when it comes to AI and coding. I think AI is very good at solving things that you don't really want to write. So, for example, you have an API that has very well-defined documentation, and you just want to do a single thing, and you don't want to peruse the whole documentation just to find out how exactly you do the setup, how you call this specific endpoint, and what the parameters are, and how to bind what you have in the code to what's needed there. And you just say, well, just make the thing for me, and you ask LLM, and it just produces a code that's generally correct. So I find AI very useful for that, and it can generate code that uses well understood algorithms from all the repositories of the world and just brings it into your repository and changes the variables so they match what you already have there, like names and symbols and all that. And that's great. But at the same time, if you try to actually edit the code in the existing code bases, you just get more of the code that's not necessarily fitting what you already have there. And it's very difficult to make it so that AI actually understands your code base. And almost every time where you try to make it do a specific thing using what you already have there, it refuses. So there is definitely a lot of work to be done on that aspect. And if you're not careful, you're generating a piece of code that is very difficult to read. So, a good piece of advice here is, if you use AI to generate code and to add to your code base, is make sure that you yourself read the code very carefully before posting a PR to other people. Don't ask them to be PR reviewers of what AI generated. like this is your role.
Also, I just my own experience, you have to write your own tests. I had Grok throw his tests at me and tell me that all the tests passes, and you could take that for granted, or you could compile the code and find out that Grok just hallucinated the test results to you. So
Yep.
I think like my opinion so far is getting like you better know what you're doing when you want to be becoming more productive with AI. You really have to double check what it's doing. There's a new audience question, actually 3 questions. Let's see that fits. Honey asks, just a curious thing, what do you think why people still hate CMake? Is it because it is hard to learn, or is it lack of support? Any ideas of improving our basic CMake understanding?
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good question. And you're right. People really don't understand CMake. Like a lot of people think that CMake is actually the next make. It's just slightly better make. That's what it does. That's what it's for. And rather than using this, I would use something like Auto Tools from Linux or something else. Right? I don't need this. And more often than not, I had comments from people saying, "No, CMake is so complex. Why do I need to read, a book that's 500 pages just to do something that I would be able to do with a batch file? Just execute a bunch of commands and then one more." So definitely, CMake is very intimidating because the knowledge available out there in the internet is scattered and very often outdated. So that's why the book was written for that exact reason, right? We want to give our readers a very comprehensive set of knowledge. If you start by learning about CMake from the middle, like somewhere an article in the web says, do this or do that, you don't exactly know if this specific article fits the version of the CMake and the style of CMake that you're writing in right now. So you have your code base and you don't really understand how CMake changed over time, and you will realize very soon that there is modern CMake and there is legacy CMake. Legacy CMake doesn't use targets, it builds everything in directories. And that's not how you structure your code today, and essentially applying those legacy techniques to your current project using modules that are outdated or superseded by something else that's way better and more convenient is going to make it so that CMake seems, this very unapproachable, weird environment that has been superseded by something better. However, if you use something like this, the book that essentially guides you from beginning to the end, your experience is going to be much different. So, thank you for the question.
That's actually a really interesting question, and yeah, I'm just directly gonna follow up this. There on Facebook, we had a comment when I got the book and I posted the book that I have the book on, and so I do get a question like, why do it all that, and why read all that when Cargo could do it all? It's like that's like for me a question. Like, you know so good about CMake. I don't know your knowledge about Cargo, but does it compare?
Yeah, I couldn't compare myself. I'm not very familiar with Cargo. It's hard to say. I mean, from what I know, Cargo is much more modern approach to CMake. It doesn't have 20 years of iterations. However, if you're focused on C++, you can explore all the options available to you. But if you're more, let's say, try to be more versatile, and you will have projects that not only use C++, because this often happens to us. In the world that we are living in, essentially knowing C++ is not always enough. And when you can use CMake to build something like Java, Go, CUDA, this is a huge advantage. It's just a big ecosystem that's widely supported. There is plenty of stuff out there, a lot of modules, and it's really difficult to separate CMake from its legacy and existing stuff out there. But as long as you have a good map, you can figure out how to get there. So maybe Cargo is a good replacement, but at the same time, There's already a lot of things that are present and ready for you.
I do agree with the legacy thing. That's that's why CMake fits very well to C++. C++ always has been a language in a community which lacks complexity. I think one should be honest with that. Complexity is the thing in C++. So I've studied CMake also through the lens of CMake init and similar CMake generators, and because I find it easy to basically have a project just being set up. And initially, I tried the CMake startup project by Jason Turner, but for me that was too much. It has everything, right? It's perfect. It's like, yes, cool, sure, that's what I should have. But it's when you're just starting out, it's not what you want to have. And so I find CMake init quite nice, but it's still evolving, and it's something else which isn't covered in the book. So I just wanted to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, I haven't explored CMake init in the book, and personally I don't have much experience with it, but from the perspective of generators altogether, CMake is already a generator, right? It generates whatever underlying build system you're gonna use. It could be Ninja, it could be GNU-make, or whatever else your platform actually supports and can use. So there is outside, it's just another tool to make your work more productive and more effective. But ultimately, there will come a time, and I guarantee it's going to be sooner rather than later, where you have to dive into the CMake code that was generated. And if you want to start with something that's already preset and essentially does everything that you need from the get-go, sure, use CMake in it. Use whatever else you can use to advance this process of setting things, because we are essentially, as programmers, we are not trying to put in as many keystrokes into our keyboard as we possibly can, but we are trying to do whatever is most effective. However, if you don't understand what you're creating, it's going to be very difficult to fix anything that breaks. So I believe in shortcuts as long as you know what the right route is.
That's true. We have a follow-up question by Honey, just about your personal history. How did you get interested in CMake and master it, and then became an author about it?
Yes. So thank you for this question, Honey. My history is quite an extensive one, given the short time that I'm working here in the industry. So throughout the 15 years of experience I've been with Ericsson, with Amazon, with Cisco, Google, and now with Axon, and also some smaller companies. But CMake specifically, I had great pleasure to use in Cisco Meraki. And what they did for the business was this cloud managed network devices. It's a very cool thing if you essentially know how to use it. And in there, we had a bunch of legacy projects that were very misunderstood, let's say that. So a lot of code written in very few files that sometimes broke. And when it broke, it was very bad. So the work to make it very legible and actually maintainable was most of my project in Meraki at the time. So I chose CMake as something that would then unpack this, help modularize it, and make it approachable. And essentially my mission that I took on myself was, everybody kind of is afraid of this thing, Big Apple. That was the name of the project. And whenever it breaks, it's like mayhem, total panic. What I'm gonna do at the end of my work is like, everybody's gonna work on this project. They will want to use it because how clean and how nice it will be. And that's how I adopted CMake and all the best practices there. And in the process of discovering how to do it with CMake and like essentially go after the best, the most modern thing, learn Docker throughout that experience, put everything together, So it led me to write the book on it, because this was a process of discovering the thing and a little bit falling in love with the tool, like how easy it makes things that otherwise would be so much more difficult, and how pretty things come out when they are done right, as they should be done. So it's a process of admiration and just sharing that with others.
Yeah, I understand. One question on one of the reference books for CMake is Greg Scott's Professional CMake, a Practical Guide. How does your book compare to that?
Greg Scott is great, and the book that he wrote is also fantastic. And I know that it's very much up to date. I think Craig is essentially following the CMake releases very closely, and whenever new stuff comes up, it lands in his book. So definitely, if you want to follow the latest, most up-to-date thing, you should definitely see that book as well. However, what I would say is how my book differs specifically is I curated the book very precisely to focus on projects, not on CMake as much, but like C++, projects, professionalism, and essentially starting from a point where you don't have a project and you end up at a point where you now learn CMake and you have a project. Specifically, you added all of the stuff that's out there. So I'm bringing frameworks, I'm bringing all of the tooling, I'm describing the tooling that you can use, C++ ecosystems, testing frameworks, static analyzers, Valgrind, all the other stuff. So from my book, you will learn not only about CMake, but also all the other stuff that's kind of useful for how you use Doxygen to write documentation for you, things like that. CMake by Professional CMake by Craig Scott will focus on every single aspect of CMake itself, which is also great if you want to go very wide. But my book specifically is maybe more a vertical approach to the problem. That's how I understand it. Maybe Craig has another perspective.
So let me see. General reminder: if you have any questions, post them to the chat. Yes. So it's a big book, second edition. Any known errors so far?
Yeah, yeah, plenty of errors. So I can show you one error. It's this one. It's the first edition. So I've essentially rewrote a lot of the first edition from scratch. It took me a year to create a second edition, and that's mostly because I approached every single chapter there and I rewrote most of it. Like I found that after writing a book on CMake, I realized, well, this is a good attempt, but I can do much better now after writing the book. So most of the second edition is not at all like the first edition. So therefore, if you thought about, is it worth it, like going after the second edition, definitely go for it, because it's not the same book at all. People do create second editions that essentially amend chapters and move them around. I practically rewrote the whole book.
That's an interesting approach, and yeah, I know the problem is basically when you write stuff and then you get better and then you learn, and also CMake has changed a lot, and then I think what we're seeing at the moment is like also the tools need to be adapting to that. We have now module support in CMake, and the IDEs need to support that. Also, I studied the CMake, which Qt Grader by default generates, and found that interesting and kind of tells me what I need to kind of copy paste into other projects to support Qt maybe, which is still something I got to do. And then on the other hand, it's so much becoming a moving target, just like C++ itself, right?
Definitely.
And yeah, that's basically the end of my questions. If you have any more questions, let us know in the comments. And generally, thanks for your time, Rafał. What are your plans regarding the future in CMake books? I think you're motivated to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say this. CMake is a great piece of software. It will make your work with C++ so much easier. Definitely recommend it. It has a vast library of modules. There is over, I think, 100 and something, 200 modules that talk directly to all the libraries there, and they are constantly maintained, even by library authors. And what you can also do is take your project and make it so that it becomes a module for CMake, and everybody else can just use it out of the box, and you essentially make it fit into the ecosystem. This is covered in the book, and you can learn it from the book. I think my goal for CMake and CMake books specifically for the next iteration, if it comes to that, would be to try and just extend on the things that I couldn't fit at the point in time. But going forward, I'm kind of interested more and more into like how you can go even higher, more abstract in terms of building the project, make them more packageable, more deliverable, and touch on something that I talked about before, which is Docker, and how you can essentially build something in CMake and then put it into a Docker and make it even more portable and accessible for everybody else who wants to use your piece of code. So that's definitely something that I'm looking into, and a lot of the AI work that we touched on a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, there's a scene chat that Honey is kind of wondering if you could say a bit more about how you pivoted towards AI in healthcare.
Right.
So mentioned in your Amazon profile.
That's right. So I was curious about the AI technology, as everybody is, and seeing how amazing it becomes more and more involved in our daily lives. I wanted to figure out if there's a way going forward for myself with AI. So I've partnered with a surgeon here in England in NHS, and together we tried to build this project that helps teach medical students how they can perform medical procedures, with the help of AI and computers. So we are building this platform that essentially asks students to pretend they are interacting with a patient, and for example taking their blood or measuring their blood pressure or doing any other task that you would normally do. And in high stakes scenario like an exam, they would do it on a mannequin and talk to a professor, and they would listen back and forth, and it's a very rare occasion during your education. And also you don't have that much time to get any feedback from the professor. You will hear, okay, good, not good, that's it, here's your grade, you pass or fail. So what we want to do is essentially create a product, a platform that allows you to have an exercise where you run your web camera, your microphone, and you do the same thing as you would do in such an exam. You pretend you're talking to a patient, you do all the steps with a mannequin arm, and you will get a piece of feedback from AI based on the voice and video recordings, and we are using latest models to try and achieve that, and we are trying to come up with our own ones as well. So there is a lot of work there using CMake, because I'm using some of the a lot of the code is written in C++ there actually. I'm using FFmpeg to capture the video streams. We are trying to synchronize them, add audio streams synchronously to the same thing. We are trying to record things from the multiple angles. So definitely using CMake in that one, and then pushing it to the cloud, trying to make some use of AI in the cloud as well. So
sounds interesting to work on this. All right, thank you for your time. It was really a pleasure to have you and to pick your brain on CMake. And then I'm going to close the interview with that. That's like the last questions we had. And
Thank you for your time. Thank you, Jens. It was great to meet you and have this interview. I wish you all the best and many, many very exciting interviews to come. See you. Oh yes, the next interview will be about game programming on May 14th. And until that, I have a little holiday. So see you all later. And thanks for coming up. Thanks for the questions for the audience. And generally, the interview will be probably online by tomorrow on YouTube if you want to see it again or if you missed it.